to invite Mr. Asaf Aprozper from Minerva Labs to present us for the first time their research result and predictions for how malicious documents are working in 2019. And he's going to give us some tips how to overcome those threats. Welcome.
Hi. Hi all. I'm happy that you all stayed and survived until now. Today we're going to talk about MalDoc Evolution, which means malicious documents and how they came to the point in our lives which they are in today. We'll give a brief history of the state of malicious documents today and how the history was so far. And I think that the most significant part of the research we did is actually quantifying what we have right now, why we see it as we see it, what they're trying to evade from, and I want you to share this actual knowledge instead of just saying, yeah, I see a lot of PowerShell. I think it's a good thing to use PowerShell to evade antivirus solutions. We actually did a more quantifying research of what actually happens today. So let's start. Actually, I'm Gal, not Asaf. Asaf is my imaginary friend here today. And yeah, that's okay. No worries. No, that's cool. Feel free to follow us on Twitter. We both did this research as part of our job at Minerva, but we are now ex-employees of Minerva and looking for our next adventure. Let's begin with the actual malware. A little bit of history. Who's in the crowd here today in the InfoSec business for over 20 years? There are some hands raised. So out of those who raised their hands, let's do the opposite. Out of those who didn't raise their hands, can you actually read this VBA macro code and understand roughly what happens? If you are not 20 years in the InfoSec business and can understand it, please raise your hands. Okay, so somebody raised his hand, so I feel okay with it. And out of those who are 20 years in the InfoSec business, do you recognize this piece of code? Yeah, Melissa. It's actually from May 1999. That's actually 20 years ago. This piece of VBA code was out, and it's amazing for me that, well, back at 1999, I was in 5th grade, and I can actually read this VBA code of this malware, and it is still relevant today in some way. So what happened in those 20 years between 1999 and 2019? Well, pretty much a lot, but not as much as we expected. Actually, macro malware wasn't here for about 15 years. Following Melissa, there's a really interesting graph by Gabor Sapanos, which I hope I pronounced his name correctly. There was just a drop a couple of years later, but back around 2013, 2014, macro malware was a thing again. And yeah, that's a really funny headline. And my take about it is that malware authors use what's working the best for them. And macro malware used to work 20 years ago. It used to work 5 years ago, and it is still working today. Melissa wasn't that sophisticated. It just self-replicated itself. It interacted with, I don't know, with sending emails to half the world directly from macro, which is a thing which I think that most of macro malware nowadays are incapable of, which is funny. Most of them are just this crappy thing that just, let's open, undocument open. 5 years ago, at least, this was the flow. Undocument open, download an executable, and then use shell execute to actually execute this file. And it might be a bit more sophisticated, up until like the recent couple of years. This, for example, it's a bit small, but I enlarged it. This was a hand-cider sample from 2016, I think, which actually injected code either on 64-bit machines or x86 machines and directly from the VBA. But that's not like the most common thing. Sorry. Yeah. So we did have, like 20 years ago, very basic stuff, and we had some progress until like 5 years ago to stuff which just downloads executables and use shell execute to execute them, with some irregularities of using code injection directly from VBA. But, well, our research about what we're seeing today is, how many of you have met PowerShell coming out of a malicious document in the last couple of years? Most of you are doing like active incident response are meeting this load of just like documents. You have a document, you see WinWord, and then WinWord starts PowerShell. Sorry, it starts CMD, which starts PowerShell, which starts another instance of PowerShell, which starts 5 different instances of CMD, and then like maybe a bit more PowerShells like down there. And that's utter madness. And that's the state of malicious macro documents today. But we try to realize why we're seeing this. So to do it, we the entire motivation came when we had like this flow of malicious documents collected from our clients. We prevented and bypassing all other security products. And we saw some like interesting things, and we decided to take like 50 most common attack campaigns. We clearly decided to prefer quality over quantity, because let's say that you have, I don't know, Emotet. You have like 1,000 different variants of Emotet per day. But why should we reverse engineer and deeply analyze 1,000 samples per day where it all does the very same thing? It's just like ridiculous. It has a different hash. Maybe the image and the Lua document is a bit different, but no. Instead, we decided to deeply analyze only a single sample out of 50 different campaigns. Those campaigns include APTs, banking Trojans. That's like a partial list. I can provide you the full list if you're interested. It is all backed up in data. So this like setting the scope of the research to deeply analyze everything which follows the actual VBA code, which follows the exploit if there's any exploit involved. And we decided to actually look step by step what happens in the infection post exploit of VBA. And after stepping through the infection stages, we started thinking about why using fileless, because, well, we have old shell execute. It still works. You can create a process using Windows APIs directly out of VBA, but, well, as years go by, it's just less and less effective. You have good security solutions today. All of this machine learning hype, it works to some extent. It is not complete bullshit. And executables saved to the disk with decent solution products, security products, are detected in kind of good radios. Not the best, but it is reasonable. And using shell execute, running an executable from the disk, it's just not as good as it used to be. So, yeah, it's just no longer good enough. And you have like pretty good monitoring tools. For a blue teamer, like, let's say you're a blue teamer and you're seeing a file which is executed out of the temp folder. It's a big no-no. You can see that WinWord executes files from suspicious folders. You should spot it like immediately and smell something fishy happening here. it's just no longer as good as it used to be. Also, you should understand it from the perspective of the AV. Inspecting files at rest on the disk is much easier because like the impact on performance is much less significant than inspecting, for example, memory. And by using fileless techniques, you stay in memory. So there's nothing saved at the disk, and the AV can't scan it as efficiently as it wants to. And you might evade some specific detections this way. And last but not least, using fileless techniques, mostly, let's say, PowerShell scripts, which are, I think, one of the most, let's say, common fileless techniques out there today, is a real challenge for machine learning solutions. Some claim that they handle PowerShell perfectly. Some claim that they disable PowerShell. There's a very, very large machine learning, I know, AI vendor which blocks PowerShell. And it prevents PowerShell malware by completely blocking PowerShell unless it is from a specific folder. It doesn't work. I actually released a tool last summer in B-Sides TLV and B-Sides Vegas, which has a nice bypass for this little limitation. So it doesn't work. They have major challenges in building this magical box detecting specifically scripts. And, well, it's a major challenge for them. And wherever there's a challenge for the AV vendors, there's an opportunity for bad guys. And they just chase blind spots. It works. So if it works, let's do it. Sometimes they even don't understand why they're chasing those blind spots, but they know they're there. And, well, why not? And that's the most interesting stats. Out of the 50 campaigns we've inspected, we found out that fileless is actually the new norm. 44 campaigns, or 88%, involved at least a single fileless technique. Either PowerShell, or injecting code, or anything else you can think about. It involved some sort of a fileless technique. And of course, they exclude the actual usage of a document as a fileless technique. And there wasn't any kind of a difference between APTs or banking Trojans we see by the pound. All of them used all sorts of fileless techniques. Many times the same technique. That's the graph of all year round. In red, you can see all of those who used fileless technique. It's not like a thing which changed in the middle of the year. All year round, they all used these techniques. Okay, but what about obfuscation? Using fileless today is not as good as it used to be. There are some mechanisms like AMSI, which submit buffers of PowerShell, for example, for further inspection, which is good. It's not a bad thing. It's a major improvement in many ways. So instead of just like doing fileless stuff, we can use obfuscation. Obfuscation is the almost mathematical functionality of taking code, changing it, but keeping its functionality the same, making it look different for the human analyst or for a machine analyst. There are many easy open source projects which do it, like invoke obfuscation and invoke dosfuscation. Also, always remember, obfuscation is not encryption. It doesn't need to involve a key, for example, to encrypt. It just like can mean that you do your code more ugly. And many times this is the case. And that's the nice logo of invoke obfuscation. Okay, so before we look at the data of how much specific obfuscation tactics were used across 2018, I'll have like a short overview of the specific techniques used, the most interesting one at least. Okay, so this one is from invoke dosfuscation. You can take a CMD and reverse a string as part of the fileless unpacking of whatever you're trying to do. It sounds very intimidating. for a human and machine analyst, it looks really ugly. But, well, yeah, it looks really ugly, but what you should actually care about is here on this side, you can see it takes a single character and it just like concatenates it iteratively at the beginning of the return value. It just like take one character each time and concatenate it at the beginning. And this way you're starting with a string and you concatenate the first string of the reverse character each time, and you end up with the reverse string. And sorry. There's like an advanced version of it. It's called for coding, again from invoke obfuscation. You have some kind of an ABC array. In this case, the ABC array is the stirf. And then you take the fourth character, the second character, the third. There's actually another loop which take characters with offset. Here you can see it with animation. And in this case, you have first. And you call the final string. It looks dumb, but this stuff actually works today as we speak in malware, which are very common, like Emotet, for example. Or URSNIF, or whatever you want. But the more we advance in this slide, the more dumb those techniques look like. This one's called rename, which is just like, yeah, there's nothing to see here. We just took PowerShell and renamed it. So it's not PowerShell any longer. I did this experiment myself. It looks pretty stupid. Just take PowerShell from its original folder, rename it to, let's say, first.exe under not PowerShell under the temp folder. And stupidly enough, this thing works. I don't know why, but I know why, because, well, computers, and there's no reason for it not to work, but it actually works against antivirus solutions. And a human analyst looking if PowerShell was executed on this machine for the last 24 hours by path will fail spotting this. And that's another kind of a somewhat interesting obfuscation technique from my point of view. And last but not least, string concatenation. I think this is the first functionality I've ever implemented myself in an Excel sheet when I was in 6th grade. It sounds stupid that this is an obfuscation technique, but it works. It actually works. My presentation was blocked by some security products because it detected a string, which is affiliated with malware. There's nothing malicious in this presentation, as you can see, but if, let's say, I wanted to bypass some kind of solution which tries to detect when somebody tries to disable AMSI, I at least up to I think it was a couple of years ago, I could have added this piece of code, but sadly enough, they've blocked it. So, well, we can be very sad about it, but instead, we could have just break it into 2 strings, and it's really stupid. You can't believe that this actually works in bypassing all kinds of security products, but it actually did. There's a great research about it by MDSec. That's their blog about it, just seek MDSec and blog and PowerShell and AMSI. And those stupid stuff actually works. So same for environment variables, which are still a thing. You know, it's really funny, but you have a percentage temp percentage, and then you can select, for example, let's say this program data is C program data. And you can take the first character and only a single character, and then you have C. And you can do the same to get CMD, like the first character and 2 characters at 9 offsets. And then you have CMD. Those stupid stuff actually works. It works today. There are some interesting side effects to using environment variables, some are quite funny. For example, some of those environment variables are different in pre-Vista and post-Vista Windows versions. So there's no compatibility of, let's say, Emotet with Windows XP. in some of the campaigns, which is quite funny. And some are different on x86 and x64 machines, so there's no compatibility with 32-bit Windows versions, which is quite funny also. It's unclear if by design or not, but it is actually a thing. Okay, and many times they don't use a single obfuscation tactic. They use, like in third of the times they use a single one, in third they don't use any, and third of the times they actually use more than one and up to 4 different obfuscation techniques in a single campaign, which is just like bunkers. It's just like, yeah, why not adding all of the tactics? Let's have an obfuscation party. I don't know, it's an interesting party. I want to be part of it, but I'm a bit weird, so. And when observing all of the obfuscation tactics year-round, we started to understand things. For example, some of the techniques like using a find and replace string, they were kind of popular around April and May, but they were gone right afterwards. And no one kind of used it. It became, bless you, it's okay. It became like more of a method to detect the malicious documents than a method to actually evade detection. So they switched. And the other way, using base 64 encoding for like delivering your partial payload became popular all year round. So it means for blue teamers that kind of having more interest in base 64 encoded payloads is a much more robust approach. And I think it's a good insight for all of you who are blue teamers in the crowd today. There are some kind of like environment variables who come and go. There was a drop, and now we see it again. There are interesting insights. And for example, using secure string, which is .NET object, was a thing for 1 month, and that's all. Zooming in on Emotet, it's even more clear that they started doing some kinds of techniques at the beginning of the year, and as the year progressed, they shifted to other techniques. It's just like, I even didn't actually design the table to be this nice when I created it. It was just in front of my eyes. It was just like amazing. Okay, so that's all about the research, but what's about the future? We'll have a quick glimpse about the future, and then we'll end this presentation. So that's actually from a week after I finished the research. That's from Emotet, and it's quite funny. It's even more stupid than string concatenation. They have like 3 different randomly non-existing folders hard-coded as part of the path. But they have also the double dots, which means like 1 folder level up, and they cancel each other. Like this random folder is canceled by those dots, etc., etc. And animation doesn't work, which sucks. But you get it, the point. You are limited only by your imagination when it comes to obfuscation and combining it with fileless tactics. But at least what I believe, personally, that will be the future is, well, in the medium to long range, so in the short to medium range, we'll see more of those creative ideas. But as time will go by, solutions will get better, and we'll see another drop in malicious documents soon, and new things will come. As we said, they chase blind spots, and they will find a new one. And, well, I have a mandatory cat image in all of my presentation, and that's my cat, by the way. And it's time for questions now. Chewbacca. Yeah, which is named after the character, which is named after the word in Russian for a dog. Yeah, that's a real thing. Yeah. So that's all.